Here we go. So I went for a walk around my parents' home, and I had my glasses hanging at the crook of my shirt. I took off my jumper, and then the glasses would have been misplaced. And when I got back from my walk, I could remember exactly the spots where it would have been, and I didn't lose my glasses like I would have in that situation normally. I just went back and got them, and I've been able to do that a bit more with stuff as I go throughout the day. Dropping my phone less because I'm remembering that it's in my hand or it's in my lap before I get out of the car or out of the chair as well.
Mm-hmm.
So little things like that, I feel like I'm making some good progress with. But yeah, sitting practice has been a little sloppy, but I have been, practicing my qigong and gladdening the mind throughout the day. So, things have been pretty good otherwise, and work's been very joyful. And it's been quite nice.
Well, that's a good report. I'm glad to hear it. Success is exactly what we're looking for. So you're beginning to feel successful in the practice, and that's...
Yep. Very much so. And it's also, I'm catching myself when I move away from super mundane right view. When I realize that the mind has wandered, or I've been, daydreaming or thinking, and it's not helping me in the moment, I can catch myself when I get annoyed at myself, and then I go, no, thank you. Thank myself for remembering. And I've found actually saying thank you to the mind for remembering has been quite a nice way of gladdening the mind.
Yes, it is. Start to appreciate the fact that, you're waking up. The skill is actually being developed. The music is actually becoming music and not just squawking sounds.
So my question is, I listened to a Dharma talk a little while ago, and they mentioned a sutta. I didn't read the sutta myself, so I can't give you the name, the Nikaya it's in or the number. But it's a discourse where Sariputta talks about the relationship between, I think it's Nama Rupa and consciousness, but I can't remember the exact things, but the analogy is, it's like when you lean two sticks together and you remove one, the other stick will fall. And I think it's analogous to like taking out the support for consciousness.
All right.
And I was just sort of wondering about cessation, where all this fits in. What's your view on those? Are they important? Do you hear about it?
Well, there's various ways of looking at the word cessation.
Yep.
So let's leave that one for a little while and start with, first off, trying to understand or define in this regard of what the word consciousness actually means.
Right.
Because it's got a very particular definition, though the word consciousness has actually several different definitions. So we're going to hone in on one definition so that we can understand what we're talking about.
Sorry, I was going to say, could I tell you what I remember of how you've taught me what consciousness is, and then you could correct any wrong that's crept in? So consciousness is the sort of the pre-processing stage of perceiving something, and I'm not talking about sana. I'm talking about...
I would not use perception talking about consciousness.
When you being conscious of seeing something, it's the actual before phassa.
Okay, you can go right to the word. It's the sight itself. Seeing. That's consciousness.
Yep.
Okay. Touch is consciousness. That sound is consciousness. Okay. Audio vibrations in the atmosphere is not the same thing. You could call that sound, but then you have to use a new word, something like hearing,
Mm-hmm.
as to define the distinction between the sound itself and the fact that that sound can be heard,
Yeah.
or that the sight is just out there because of the light, but because there's an eye to receive that light, that eye with that object of that light now has a consciousness.
Yeah.
All right, now these both are fairly sophisticated consciousness, but it's still just consciousness. And that part of the consciousness, mostly at that level, would be, for instance, with the eye, would be colors, shapes, and movement,
Right.
but not much more than that. But the distinction about the shapes is quite uh, surprisingly accurate.
Right.
In other words, you can see the leaves of a tree directly just by looking at it. But then being able to even visualize or talk about a tree or think about it in the sense of using the word tree uses another process of the mind.
Yeah. So that's already a higher level of mental processes when you get to the point of being like, this is a phone, this is Dhammarato. I'm already beyond just pure consciousness or pure sight consciousness. I've gone to like perception, and then
Right.
yeah.
Now, okay, now that is what the nama rupa actually is. Nama rupa means that you're taking the outside physical object that came through the consciousness, or the fruit of the consciousness is the is the rupa that we're now going to perceive.
Right.
And that perception then is the nama rupa process of turning it from an actual physical object that's seen with the eyes into an internal representation that has a name. That's what the word nama means. So we've named it now to be a tree. In fact, we might have a whole story about it.
So one thing I've sort of noticed is like, say when I go for a walk, right, I notice that there's a sense of like separation between objects. Like there's a discrete, like I have a sense of like, this is, like the tree here is different from this tree here, which is from here. And, even if I'm not actually making that process, I'm still sort of subconsciously or internally going, there's a difference. And if I'm doing the just a consciousness thing, I would just be seeing sort of like that whole dead sphere, and without identifying it or making sort of delineations between it.
I really like that word identifying, because that is the nama rupa process, is to identify things.
Mm-hmm.
And it literally has to do with taking something as an object in order to identify it.
Right.
So one of the ways of working then is working with the sight as a practice that you might want to start practicing as often as you think about it, is to use the eyes, open the eyes, and gaze with the eyes without taking any objects. And as soon as you recognize that the eyes have taken an object, which means the perception has started now, is to take that and move it to someplace else so that the eyes do not rest long enough on an object to perceive it.
Right.
And so this is a practice to play with that, to say, can you just gaze without looking at anything or identifying anything, but rather just allow the landscape to blissfully sway in its dance and just see the movement.
I think I've sort of caught bits of this happening. Like sometimes, I feel like it's this narrowing, using sight's the easiest way of doing it. But, you'll feel like it's like if you're walking towards something, it's when something catches your eye and then you look at it, that specific thing, and then that's when you've, like, I mean, I'm pretty sure you've already been doing Namarupa quite extensively at that point, but you know, that's like quite a gross example of it, where you're just walking along and then something, you know, you really lock onto something, like, oh, there's that dog over there, and I can catch that sometimes. More and more I've noticed that.
Some of the ways it's talked about is grabbing your attention.
Mm-hmm.
But another way of looking at it is that these are what they call distractions.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, a distraction then. Well, let's dissect that word a little bit. And what we're talking about is that, in fact, that the track that you're on is a track of no objects.
Yep.
So that when you get distracted, that means that the distraction is one of those objects that is now taken as an object. So that's the distraction. It literally feels like it grabs our attention, but you were using the right language when you said that you locked on to it, which is much closer to what's actually happening than it grabbed your attention.
Yeah, because it's really more like, and and this is where you sort of feel it. You know, I've been quite catching the sort of the pitter patter of like different little things locking on and getting the Vedana, you know, and then and you can just see even this when you lock onto something, it's like that, you know, your awareness sort of closes in on it, and you know, then it's like, oh, there's this thing, and then there's me, in, you know, it's quite interesting, you know, and it can happen just like that as well.
You're exactly correct. You're describing something accurately. Let me talk about it a bit. And
Yes,
that
please.
is that what the goal is to open up to be here now in the sense of a larger thing. So that we don't take anything as an object long enough that we just kind of bounce from object to object to object to object, relishing in the joy of how much there is that could be paid attention to. That there is, it's not choiceless. There are a lot of different choices, but there is so much happening that is, nothing is happening that stands out big enough to be a distraction, because everything else is kind of an ordinary kind, maybe not equal, but an ordinary kind of weight, so that there's nothing that stands out to latch on to. And so that's a state of being that you can get yourself into and then maintain it in what they call open, in the sense of an open gaze or be here now. And when someone is in a state like that, it's really, really, really difficult to sneak up on them. It's really, really hard to sneak up on them because they're there, they're awake.
Because once you start focusing on one thing, you're not actually giving the rest of the world equal, I don't want to say attention, I guess equal weighting, if you want to, if I'm using this correctly. But, you know, like,
yes. Equal weight, and basically the weight is zero. That nothing is there strong enough or big enough to get to be worthy of latching on to. And in that regard, you could call it nothing, no place to go and nothing to do, because the mind is in that state to where there's nothing that's worth latching on to. And that can happen at several different places in the Paticca Samuppada. For instance, one can, in fact, perceive and come to the state of seeing it as it is, but they're not using a lot of old junk to do any processing, so that all of the feelings that arise are almost always pleasant feelings.
Right.
So that's also another part of it. But there's also the part that where, yeah, there's still stuff getting mixed in there from the past, but when those kind of feelings come up, I know it immediately and say, aha, I caught you, and then I can turn that stuff around. So these are these various points of the mind of how can we settle down further and further and further into nothing to do and no place to go?
Mm-hmm.
One is to turn the feelings around, and the feeling is there is something to do and some place to go, and we say, nah. And then we have the feeling of, well, there's no place to go and nothing to do. But down at this level of the consciousness and the perception is when the mind is not taking any objects at all. So there winds up being nothing worth perceiving any. And so that's really a state of be here now.
Right.
And that it's a really a whole lot of now that's happening right now, and a whole lot of here that's happening.
Mm-hmm.
But by not taking any object, we can be in that state of mind for, let us say, once you see how delicious it is, you begin to linger in that state.
Because this is something I've thought about. I haven't thought super far into it. That's sort of why I wanted to talk to you about it. But it's this sort of thing is, I just wonder, how can I skillfully sort of access this at times? Say like at work, you have a certain task to do, is this sort of like you don't necessarily just go completely out because you have some sort of work to do, but you don't sort of take anything
No, yeah, what you can do if there is a particular task, and let's see that that task is well defined and that the time period that it's going to take is also fairly well defined. Let's say an hour's worth of work or something like that. All right, maybe 30 minutes, doesn't matter. The point is you can come to that work either with, oh, I would rather do my meditation, but I'll go ahead and get this work done. Or you can come to this work in the sense of, okay, here's a task to do. I'm the champion. I'm going to make short, happy work of this thing because the mind is strong and sharp right now. And I'm going to pay attention to what I'm doing and I'm going to get her done. And if there's any moment in time when I'm in a state that I'm doing it, but I don't like to do it, that's the time to take a break. Stand up and walk away from it.
That's a good idea. I'll keep that in mind because it's quite funny.
It's all about attitude. It's all about it's all about Eightfold Noble Path. It really is. Right view is get her done. Right attitude is, yeah, we can do that.
Because it's actually so funny. I chuckled to myself when you said, "Oh, I want to do my meditation, but do this work." I've caught myself think that so many times, right? And I sit there like, "Well, when I get home, I'm gonna meditate. Like,
now I'm going to be so good."
So good. And then it's so funny when you get there. Suddenly, it's like, "Oh, maybe I don't want to meditate." Oh, it's like, oh wow, you were really happy to meditate 2 hours ago in traffic, buddy. What happened there?
Yes, exactly. That's exactly right. And good catch that you can begin to see that.
It's actually quite humorous in a way. It's like, you finally come up to it after you've made it into this big thing, and then it's like, oh, no thanks. It's like, oh well, and I can actually, I've stopped myself a few times. It's not constant. I won't big myself up or anything, but when I do catch it, it's like, no, I can, I don't have to not meditate at work or while I'm doing this, and when I do that, I can just click into doing the work a bit more joyfully and put that away, because really all I'm doing is making myself suffer if I sit there going, yeah, meditation right now would be the bee's knees, but I have to fill up the shell.
Wouldn't it be the bee's knees to happily do this work? And everybody's happy that the work was done happily. That's the bee's knees. Yes, learn to be happy at whatever you're doing. There is that situation imagine a window that's got 4 panes in it, okay? In one, at the top or the bottom, the top two are feel good and the bottom two are feel bad. That's your choice, to feel good or to feel bad. On the left and the right is, on the left it's get the job done, and on the right is don't do it or mess it up or try hard or do something stupid. All right? So there's the difference between get her done and really get her done right, or get her half done or really mess up on one side. And then the other one is liking and not liking.
Mm-hmm.
And when you recognize that that's true about everything, mostly what people do is that they say, okay, I'll do it, but I don't like it. But many people will do it, but they'll do it wrongly because they're frustrated and they don't like who told them to do it anyway. And they play loser intention. It's almost to the point of, hey, if I screw up everything you asked me to do, you won't be asking me to do anything anymore, and that's just fine with me. But I'm not going to come out and tell you no. I'm going to just screw up everything that you asked me to do.
You know, I think I found another thing that this Nibbana thing does, you know, with the standing up, the closing the doors, it kind of wipes the slate clean a bit before you start a new thing. Like, and I caught it really work. I was just sitting in my car grumbling about something. I can't remember what it is. And then I was like, wait, I don't have to do this. And normally, you know, like you'd get out of your car and you still got some residual like razzling going on. But then I did the little, you know, deep breath, got up, closed my door, another deep breath, and it was sort of like, oh, that really doesn't seem like a big deal anymore. You know, and that, I was really proud of myself for that one. Because it was like, you know.
And this is exactly what we're looking. I wouldn't actually call it pride, but you actually are pleased that you're developing a skill, that you can remember to do this, and that you're getting the joy out of actually doing it. Mm-hmm. It's literally very clearly like the example of calling a puppy, and the puppy comes because he likes getting petted and attention and maybe a treat, and so they'll come when they're called. Mm-hmm. So now you're calling the mind. And so now you got to pet that mind and got to say, hey, good mind, boy, good doggy mind.
Yeah, keep it up. I've really like, I found myself trying to alter sort of my self-talk a little bit as well. So like when I gladden the mind, you know, I'll be like, oh, you remembered, thanks buddy, good job, you've really been on fire today. Or if I catch myself forgetting, I'm like, hey, you really got it that time, that was super quick. You know, like there is like a little bit you can sort of incline yourself to even enjoy your failures, you know, and then it doesn't feel like a failure.
What you're talking about reminds me of, there's a whole kind of book, perhaps a whole section of a bookstore devoted to what they call self-help books. And every one of them offers good advice with one disadvantage: nobody can remember to take that good advice. That's why the teaching of sati is so important, because now you're beginning to bring sati up on a regular basis, and wow, look at the new insights that it brings.
Yeah, it's really, and you don't have, I've found it sort of simplified a lot of things in meditation as well, like to the point that sometimes I enjoy my just daily life more than a sitting practice, because sometimes I slip into like a goal orientated thing with sitting meditation more easily, and when I'm just out and about, I'm like, you know, so obviously I just need to work my attitude in the sitting posture. But you know, it's really, it is actually it's kind of simple, really.
Okay, well here, let me give you a new goal.
Mm-hmm.
Now your goal is to catch the mind trying to make goals in sitting meditation. So when you start dreaming about, oh, I want to be enlightened, then you can say, aha, I see goal making. That's the goal. Or, oh, I want a second jhana. Let me see back. Then you can say, aha, I call you Mr. Goal Maker.
The goal, like, I really, when you first told me about this no place to go stuff, and there isn't a goal sort of thing, I really sort of, I kind of fought against it, because I was like, but how am I gonna, I've got my laundry list of things I need to do, and it's
Yes,
actually
I know.
it just gets in the way a bit, doesn't it?
Yes, that laundry list, is that your life? Who's more important, you in this present moment in happiness, or that list, that to-do list? And a lot of people say, well, wait a minute, this to-do list is pretty damn important. I'll have to think about that. I've already sold my soul to the devil, and what I got was this to-do list. Perhaps I can trade this to-do list back to the devil and get my soul back again.
It's just like, it feels a bit silly to like think how, I really just fought against, like, no, I've got to, I guess you sort of make a mountain into a molehill into a mountain sometimes for meditation. And like, as soon as you really start thinking about the map, like a map, or which jhana you are, you're kind of not really there anymore, are you? You're just sort of
wanting things. That's called suffering, right?
Yeah.
That's exactly right. That's why it's so important to actually set goals that are immediately available. To talk about little dhamanas are immediately available. All you have to do is take in that deep breath and a nice good sigh, out breath, and it's immediately available.
The sigh on the sitting down is quite good, because you can sometimes, if you do it really good, you just flop into the chair and you're like, and it feels very nice. Very nice indeed.
And how many tens of thousands have you sat down in the chair and not enjoyed it?
Oh, I can't even imagine how many times.
Now, but from now on, when you sit down in the chair, you'll really enjoy it. You can get a good blast out of putting your butt on the furniture. That's exactly right. So I'm glad to hear that you're making some good observations, good insights based upon good sati.
It's really enjoyable, and it's just, life has been very, very fun, really. You can just have a good time. And it's a lot of it really is, I just see more and more how much the attitude thing is, how important it is, and how right you are about that. Because you can sort of just, it doesn't really matter then. You don't need a technique as much because you've got your attitude.
Right. And you've got this, when you say a technique, let us say that you've got this absolutely marvelous top of biology object of meditation here, this human form, this human body with all of its feelings, all of its mental processes, all of the bullshit, and that whole 9 yards of it is such a marvelous object of meditation. And then you have to add the environment along with it, that which this enormously complex human body exists. We exist in an extraordinarily complex environment, and the whole quality of this human body living in this environment is through the senses. And so that's why we want to stay in the senses rather than in that sixth sense. When I first heard about the sixth sense, I thought, oh, that's the marvelous part. Oh, yeah, right. I know about the other five, but now the Buddha's got a sixth sense, right? Was I wrong about that? Because, oh no, the sixth sense, that's what causes all the crap. That's the one that won't come outdoors to see the reality of the fact that here we are in this marvelous existence in the here now. Oh no, I want to use this sixth sense to muck around in the past, try to solve old problems, try to dream up new things and new schemes and new competitions and new crap. When in fact, if I would come back to be in the senses here, there's no problem in the moment. In the here now, there is no danger.
I see. I really am starting to see that more and more for myself, you know, and it's just like sometimes it can be quite silly what it seems like. Oh, you know, something comes up and it's like, I don't really think this is that important at all, actually. You know, it's like just some very silly things. I can't give an example right now, but you know, it's just like something will come up and it's like, no, I don't need to. Why would I think about that right now? You know, like it's literally not important.
Actually, you're making point of a part of the Paticca Samuppada that a lot of people don't quite understand, and that's that point that is called pasa or contact.
Yep.
Okay. What that means would, other words that might be more meaningful, is that which strikes your to strike your fantasy or to strike your fear or to push your button. That's the kind of contact. And you're saying that in this state that you can have, there's no button pushing. The contact is not strong enough to register. And so there's not going to be any feelings to arise because nothing is strong enough to contact us enough to make feelings come up.
Could you give though you gave two examples, pushing a button and then there was the other one. I liked both of them. I just wanted to write down the other one. Pushing your buttons and
striking you.
Yep, there we go. Thank you.
Strike your fantasy or strike your fancy or here's another one that actually works too, and that is push you over the edge.
I like striking as well because it does sometimes feel like, because afterwards, you know, when you get the contact and then if you let a feeling arise, it does feel like you've been slapped sometimes.
Exactly so. That's exactly what we're talking about here. Now, the more than likely that getting slapped feeling comes not from the reality of what was coming from the sense, but rather it was when perception took what was on the outside world and mixed in it something that was old from the past to give us that kind of contact that was strong enough to give us the feelings. That's why we want to stay out of the past and stay in the present moment, because the more in the moment we have, the closer the mind is to actual reality. That's amazing. Think about that. That what is insanity is wanting things to be different than they are. That's the definition of insanity. But they also say that insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a new response.
So when you say Fassa brings up the old perception with the Fassa, like after Fassa gives you that slapping feeling because of mixing in old stuff with perception, would that be pulling something out of your sankharas?
That is the sankharas. That's right. The bucket that you're pulling it out of, that bucket is called sankhara bucket.
Bucket of shit.
But rather than a bucket, and I'm talking about let us call it a cess bucket or a, what do they call it, a chamber pot. But more to the point is every person's own personal sewer. And what we do generally is that all the new stuff that happens, we just throw into that same sewer pot and everything winds up being sewage. But somehow or another, we need to lay some sort of separator between by recognizing that now is now and is going to start with a now, so that we're now going to start building new good feelings based upon new good actions and new good insights, and we're no longer going to be dealing with the old past. so that the further in the past it goes, the less likely we're going to mess with it. So that all of our new perceptions are going to be based on more new information that is wholesome, Dhamma information, winding up coming up with good results that in the old days we would come up with bad feelings instead.
So, like, to give a concrete example in my mind, say when I was, and this isn't actually what happened, just so you know, but say when I was a little boy, I got bit on the bum by a dog, and I really, now whenever I see a dog, I'm just like, the flea-ridden mutt. That'd be, even if that dog was a little pug, you know, a little snorty animal that couldn't hurt a fly, and I still was like, yuck, that'd be a sign that I've reached into a Sankara and made that reaction myself, because I've said that pug's not going to hurt me and bite me on the butt.
Right. Not only that, but you have reached into that same memory bank hundreds and hundreds of times over the time that it took for you to grow up, so that you had that reaction to every dog that you ever saw just a little bit. And every time a new dog comes up, you treat them the way that you wanted to treat that first dog that bit you in the butt. And that's one of the major reasons why there are some people that just don't like dogs. It's because they had a bad experience with a dog when they were a little kid. And then they don't like them for their whole life.
And you don't take in any new information about the dog because you never give them a chance to give
them a chance, exactly.
Right. Okay, this is making more sense. This is, you know, I feel, you know, each time we talk, I feel like this puzzle box gets a little bit easier to sort of, you know, not jamming pegs in the wrong way as much.
Now, it is also possible for someone to, through coming, let us say that actually did happen to you or a student like yourself who had come through the meditation and beginning to understand how the mind works, that will now intentionally be around dogs just so that they can deal with these feelings in a wise, perhaps humorous way, to where the first time they even try that, they wind up being really friends and loving with the dog and holding the dog and maybe having tears of joy of the fact that they've got over their hatred of dogs.
Right.
This can happen. This is exactly what phobia management in psychotherapy is all about.
Exposure therapy, yeah.
Expose the people to their phobias and they'll get over them. But so long as you allow them to avoid the things they're afraid of, they will continue to be afraid of those things, like death. Okay, that's why I recommend go to every funeral in town for a while.
Might have to just bring that up to maybe a neutral beta. A neither bad nor good one, because if I start laughing at funerals, I don't think I'll be welcome around town.
Well, for me, often some of the funerals were very joyful. Being a monk in the U.S., there was a time when there was a lot of funerals and not very many monks. So we actually had to plan in advance. And because Mahasamsak, the temple abbot at Greensboro, knew all of the various people in the various traditions and spoke very good English, he wound up with his group always being the fill-in for whenever other places that needed more monks, he would schedule us to go to that particular funeral. So I've been around to a lot of funerals. And there is some joy to see. In fact, I remember one in particular, a Cambodian young man, that I helped him by holding his hand doing the funeral chant while he pushed the button for his father's cremation to start up, the firing up of the machine. Now, that firing up of the incinerator in the U.S. is symbolic of the lighting of the first piece of fire onto the funeral pyre if it's going to be an actual old style cremation. Okay, it's when you finally set the thing on fire. So that's basically what I was doing with this guy. And he was a young man. But after that, he was so devoted to me. He was really, really a good friend. I helped him in a moment that he really needed it. And that helped us become good friends.
Right. So
there's some good stuff that comes out of even funerals.
it's all about the attitude as well that you take to it, I should say.
Mm-hmm.
So this Sankara thing can work both ways, though, and I imagine this is what sort of becomes addiction at some point, right? Because you have this idea of, say, like we'll use an extreme example, say like heroin or whatever, and someone, they do it the first time and they really love it, and each subsequent time they sort of ignore how bad that it makes them feel and whatnot, because they've got the idea of it in their mind is really great, and they ignore the actual input afterwards of what happens when they do heroin or whatever.
Most of the chemicals like that have a particular chemical effect.
Mm-hmm.
And that for young men also looking at porn, they do that same chemical reaction, but it's more of a natural one that's created by the anterior cortex. And in that case, the chemical is called dopamine. Dopamine is a very powerful drug, and it in the mind is regulated by tryptophan, which is an uptake drug that will inhibit the way dopamine operates. Cocaine does exactly the same thing, except that cocaine is kind of like dopamine on its own. So when that gets into the bloodstream, it's like flooding the whole mind with the same kind of dopamine that we get from good feelings. That's the reason why people really like cocaine. But cocaine, like dopamine, are very powerful drugs, so that the recepting neuron that receives this dopamine hit, it hits it with such impact that it literally destroys this neuron.
Right.
Now, what that means is that that hit of dopamine only lasts for a while, and then it begins to wear off. And if you take more cocaine, it's only going to give you not quite as good a hit.
Right.
So that the more you take it, the less effect it has. You have to wait for a while, and it tends several days to get those neurons back in shape. So if a kid's doing porn every day, he's not going to enjoy it. He's just going to be in the habit of doing it.
Right. Same with one that's pretty close to home is compulsive internet browsing. That's a big old that's like dopamine central, really. And I've been sort of fair bit better with my internet usage as of late, and reading a book is way, way, way easier, and it makes me sort of think about I've been sort of questioning sort of habits a bit more as well. What's more skillful and what's not skillful, and the big one was getting off Dharma forums. That has been a great choice, to be honest.
I'm sorry, what was that?
Getting off Dharma forums.
Oh, interesting you should say that. Yes. Those things can also be addictive.
Oh, yeah. You get this feeling of like, oh, I'm reading Dharma stuff, sort of. So I'm kind of doing a good thing, and you sort of let yourself think that you're really doing something. But when I've actually sat with, I've got, I still go through phases where I will go on a mad reading binge or whatever. And it's like, this just makes me feel kind of crap afterwards. And, if I've read a bunch of contentious stuff, it puts doubt in my mind. And, you can actually just not do that to yourself. And I've only been, I check occasionally sometimes, because sometimes I do like to read the stuff, but a lot better, than when I first started, I would hang out on all kinds of forums, just hours and hours, and it was seriously messing my practice up, like really badly.
Well, here's one of the problems with those forums
Hmm.
is that the best teachers are not on them. Another problem with those forums is the best students are also not on them, like you quit. And so what you wind up with on these forums is people who are arguing with each other over things that neither one of them understand correctly.
Mm.
And so when some good teacher or someone who really knows something comes on and says something that's worthwhile talking about, these two guys then will team up with each other to attack whatever it was that came on that would be good Dhamma.
Mm.
And so, in that regard, if there is good Dhamma to be put on, we need to address it as kind of like a new topic rather than an answer to someone, and just state it and then walk away from it. Kind of like Zen and the art of archery. Or the way that I would call it would be Zen and the art of donuts. But we could call this one Zen and the art of dog piles.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
So,
You can.
right, so you just go onto these forums and just lay them a dog pile of Dhamma down and then just walk away from it. You're not concerned over what happens with it or who says what or anything like that. You just lay that pile of stuff out there and leave it. Don't ever come back to answer any questions or anything.
It's a lot better to do this, I think. I have really noticed this, and I hope this doesn't sound like I've gotten a bit high on my horses about knowledge, but I do feel like a lot of this does come to a bit of posturing, and you can see it in certain areas. And that's not to say that there aren't smart people who hang out here and do stuff. Like Daniel Ingram still posts like a madman, but yet
Like a, excuse me, like a what? And that sets him apart and unique from any of the others.
Well, I mean, I think Dan, I trust Dan's opinion a fair bit more than most internet Dharma dudes. But you can get like, I think it's definitely easy to slip into like pretty much just a pub argument online, really. And because of the anonymity thing, you can get pretty nasty. So you don't have to worry about the other guy getting in your grill afterwards.
Let me tell you this story. Perhaps this will help understand about that. Mm-hmm. After the time of the Buddha started to teach, one of the things that he would do, because he was already in this community, I mean, he knew all about it, everything that was happening in that whole area of India, spiritual-wise, he knew who was doing what. Mm-hmm. And so he would go to one major teacher after another and have, let us say, set it up or call them out in such a way so that they would have to have a public, open dialogue with the Buddha to discuss with the intention of the Buddha to convert this guy into the actual real correct Dhamma, so that when he comes, he will bring all 500 of his students along. Mm-hmm. And that happened time and time and time again. It's actually an old story about the Buddha, that was part of the reason why he would be considered and called a lion, was because nobody could take him out in dialogue.
Yeah, I've read a few of the suttas where he does that, but I think, well, we're all not Buddhas, so some people, I think, sort of try and do that.
From time to time. So don't go on while you're not a Buddha. Only go in there when you're a lion to have something to roar about.
But, this is I've been really sort of trying to take into account some of the things, not that you've said to me, but I sort of have read some stuff you've written as well, and some of the stuff your students have said about making wise decisions. And well, you actually have said this to me many times, but and it is sort of like you do sort of find these little areas where you just sort of ignored what you were doing a bit. And the internet has been a big one I'm trying to work on, and I'll try and think of some more and talk to you about them later. But
one of the things that does happen is that when people get on the spiritual path, they tend to take on higher quality friendships.
Mm-hmm.
That their old drinking buddies they tend to leave behind. And I would imagine that same sort of thing happens on the internet too, that you can just get tired of the kind of stuff that you're hearing there, and that you only approach the internet in that regard from the position of what kind of dog piles can I drop occasionally that can be of some use or value to some of the people who are just reading rather than those who are let us say getting their paws stuck in that dog pile. I'm mixing metaphors here.
Yeah.
Do you know Uncle Remus? This is an American South. It was Disney made a movie of it in 1948 called The Song of the South, and it immediately, or not immediately, but eventually became banned.
I've heard about it, but I don't think I know too much about the story. Was this the blackface thing?
Yeah, well, it was blackface, but it was also a black man who was the wisest man in the territory, Uncle Remus. And these are his Uncle Remus stories. And one of them is when Brer Fox and Brer Bear got together and made a tar baby, black tar.
Right.
And they set it aside of the road because they knew that Brer Rabbit, being as friendly as he was not going to pass by. And so when Brer Rabbit passed by, he says, "How y'all?" And nobody said anything. And so the Brer Rabbit gets angry and he starts beating up on this tar baby. Okay, so that's the analogy that I'm using with this. Let them go after the dog piles that we'll leave on the internet from time to time.
So, just as you get this sort of closer to this consciousness thing, is this when you get to like, I guess, the unfabricated? I'm sort of wondering, is that what a cessation is? It's a taste of the unfabricated?
We have to be careful about that word fabrication because the actual Pali word then is sankhara.
Right.
And we have to recognize that things happen sankhara-wise on a regular basis. Right. Things come together, but when they do, they will fall back apart.
Right.
And that happens at a microscopic, or it happens at a microsecond level. It happens at a momentary level. It happens over 5 or 10 seconds.
And
how long does it take to reach your arm out and grab something? Okay, that's how long it can last. How long does it take to pull the trigger of a gun? Okay, so some really big things can happen very quickly.
Right.
But some things take a long time.
Mm-hmm.
It takes a tree, for instance, if you put a wire around a tree, it'll take a long time, but that tree will eventually grow out and over that wire that's around the tree, and it'll eventually break that wire if it can. It's a chain. I've seen trees like that.
That's actually sorry. Go ahead, please.
No, go ahead.
It's actually I read about this was a technique they used to do to make a mace back in when people made maces, I guess, on the regular, they would put an iron ball or a spiky thing in a tree, like really whack it in there, and then the tree sort of protrudes out over the years, and then you can sort of just chop it off, and you've got a mace.
Right. The other word for it is shillelagh.
Shillelagh. Ah, okay. So that's what a shillelagh is.
Yeah, it's the same thing. It's that mace, and it can also be done with a burl.
What's
which is a burl is a root where that same thing happens. A stone or something gets in the root, and the root will surround it.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so that's the other kind. But yeah, in fact, it's the in the days years ago when tobacco was very common, it would be the burl pipe that people would want.
Ah, okay.
Okay, so they would take that piece of root or the spike and take it and bore out that the rock or whatever, and then take a little piece of wood that was sticking out and put a hole through that, and that was because it's the hardest wood available. Even the hardest wood of a tree, you want to burl out of that one too, because that's the really hardest kind of wood. Okay. So anyway, back to the idea of consciousness.
Yep.
I do want to express that there is another kind of consciousness that we should talk about.
Yep.
And that other kind of consciousness happens just at the point of impact, or right before it immediately. All right. And here's how we're going to use the word. Use the word seeing as a kind of consciousness.
Yep.
So I say, I see the tree, and now I can say, I see what you mean.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So this kind of consciousness is a fully formed internal representation, or the picture or the dialogue that is perceived. So perception starts with consciousness, it perceives its way through it, and it winds up with another kind of consciousness.
Right. Dhamma, would this be a Dhamma?
This is called the Salayatana.
Ah, okay. And then...
The Salayatana is that part which is the senses themselves are atana, but the Salayatana is the internal representation, which is actually then that which causes the contact. It's that internal consciousness. It's
right.
that knowing.
So I'm imagining you could very easily mistake Salayatana for like a seeing consciousness. So you'd have...
Think about it like this. That what we want it to do is to be there and useful, but not polluted with the past.
Right.
To not use the old sankharas for the perception to come up with a representation. We want the representation, the internal representation, to be as close, the second kind of consciousness, as the first one as possible.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, it's almost like thinking about it like this. Do you know what I mean by OCR?
Yeah, I do. The scanning of old books.
All right, so think about it like that. Perception is the OCR software. Right. The scanner gets the photo.
Ah, yeah.
All right, but the file is the perceived OCR output.
Right.
And they're not the same.
Yeah.
But we want them to be the same as close as possible.
So when you start practicing, you've got a very old piece of OCR software from Windows 95 that doesn't
No, from 100 million years ago.
Wow, so that's some old software.
That's some old software.
And that's why you've got to run the upgrade, and get into the here now.
Right. We got to put new OCR software in the frontal cortex because that old reptilian software in the back of the mind is just so out of date.
literally old as a dinosaur.
Literally. Much more like a crocodile. Dinosaurs are different. We're much more like reptilian.
Right.
We're not bird-brained.
I mean, sometimes you can feel that way.
We're a bunch of snakes. Okay, so now that we've talked about consciousness from both ends of it, that will give you the really kind of understanding. So the Buddha's talking about consciousness really is that when it's connected directly with the eyes, the very first kind of consciousness, the sense, that which we can sense.
Right.
So you have actual reality, then sense reality, and then a perceived reality. And often that perceived reality is crap because it's got old processing done.
So there's actual to sense and then perceived reality. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, that OCR analogy was very good. That was helpful.
Good. Well, now you have something new to kind of look for.
Mm-hmm.
And so right now I've got a couple of people waiting. So if you don't mind, I'm going to sort of check out the side door here.
Yep, that's okay. This really clarified quite a lot of things. Thanks for the Dhamma.
All right, Ashley, we'll see you soon.
Yep. See you later. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.